GitHub. We look at the fundamental concepts in Git, and would also look at a simple project example as we walk through the fundamental concepts in Git. I wanted to add one slide here, but I forgot. But if you want to pronounce Git, it is Git, that the way I'm pronouncing it, and it is not JIT. I used to pronounce it as JIT before. I made a tutorial video where I pronounced it JIT the whole time. And when I realized the correct pronunciation, I was like, do I go back and delete that video or delete the previous videos I've made? So the first thing I want to clarify is it is pronounced Git, not JIT. And the second part is pronounced GitHub and not GitHub. So if you currently pronounce it GitHub, now you know the right spelling. And before I move forward, I also want to ask if you have heard about Git before, if you've heard about GitHub before, can you just signify? You can use a reaction. You can share in the comments. Okay. Yeah, I see many people raising up their hands, but you're not supposed to raise up your hand. You're only supposed to add a reaction. Wait, I want to just control the monitor better so I can see everybody clearly. Okay, great. So let's continue. So why do we need Git, or why do we need GitHub? I can see a few hands saying they have heard about this before. I don't know how many of you use it actively. I use Git and GitHub actively, like literally any project I want to work on, I create a Git project for it. So let's look at life without Git and GitHub. Life without Git and GitHub means you'll be storing your project files locally. Whatever project it is you're building, maybe a JavaScript project, a Python project, maybe it's even just your portfolio made with HTML and CSS. If you're not using Git or GitHub, your project files will be stored locally on your device. You can actually choose to use Google Drive, but then if you're using Google Drive, that means any change you make, you have to copy the whole folder and push to Google Drive or Dropbox or wherever. And that is also not a smooth experience. Without Git and GitHub, you would also have to upload the whole project to a hosting provider. Like I said, you have to upload the project to Google Drive, Dropbox. If you're using WordPress or any of these CMSs, you have to upload the whole project. When you make a change, you have to upload the whole project. I remember, I think during my time of internship, when I was working on this project and I wasn't using Git or GitHub at the time, I would always have to upload that whole project. Even when I make a simple change, I have to upload everything. Also, it's a tedious work if you have to go to a previous version of your project. Now, because my project is just one whole project, if I make some updates to that project and I want to revisit what the previous version looked like before my recent change, that would be difficult without Git or GitHub. I would have to go through the files and like check and be like, okay, I think this change was added this particular time, or I think this change was added this time. It's all I think, and there is no formal way to really know what changes were added with new versions. Another experience without Git or GitHub means that sharing project files is more work. I remember also then during my internship, whenever I had to send a change to my manager, I would have to like zip the file and then send that zip file to my manager, or I would have to put the project in a hard drive or in a memory card, and then I give the person I want to share the file with, and then they plug it to their system, open the storage device, and then they can see all the files that I shared with them. Also not a nice experience. And one more thing, I think there's actually one more point. You're also unable to preview previous history. So if you want to look at what your project was like maybe 10 days ago, that is impossible because your whole project is one whole project. It will be hard for you to see what your project was at this particular time, what your project was before this feature was added. Like, what was the state of my project before I added authentication? That would be impossible without Git. And a lot of manual work is involved if you're not using Git or GitHub. And I also want to say this, that this video is more of a, sorry, not this video. I've done a lot of YouTube videos. This meeting is more of an introduction. So this is the part 1, and tomorrow we'll be looking at the part 2 with Anita. I think Anita is currently on the call. And part 2 will be more of practical work, but then today we'll be setting the pace, understanding some of the concepts that are involved when you're working with Git project, GitHub, or everything related to Git. So I talked about going back to a previous version, which is difficult if you are not using Git or GitHub. And what do I mean by this? Let's say you want to remove the recent changes that you made to your project. It requires a lot of manual process. You have to go through different files and be like, was this the file I changed in the last version? Or was this the file I changed in this, or blah, blah, blah. You have to manually go through these files and then delete your change before you can get the previous state. That is a lot of manual work. Also, you lose track of when a change was added. And there is a typo here. It's supposed to be lose, not lost. But let's say I want to know when I added authentication, or I think I use authentication example a lot. Let's say I want to know when I changed the header from blue to yellow. Without Git or GitHub, that would be impossible. I would have to, unless maybe I've worked on that project for a lot of time and I've been with that project for so many years, or yeah, for a long period of time. And then I remember that I think it was when I had this problem that I changed this or I changed that. It's pretty hard to actually know when changes were made. And especially in a company setting where things change like repeatedly or regularly, knowing when a change is added is very important. And also, going back to a previous version, without Git or GitHub, it makes debugging new changes harder. Let's say you make a change in your recent update to your project, and then your project now has this problem. Maybe your customers are complaining, or maybe the view is no longer correct. Without Git or GitHub, you cannot really track versions. So if you want to debug the new changes that you have added to see where the problem is coming from, again, a lot of manual work. You cannot really get like one solid view where you see, okay, these were the changes that I added, and now I know this is where the problem is coming from. So now live with Git and GitHub, which is of course important because we need to understand why exactly we need this tool, is number 1, for storing files for your project. Just as you use maybe Google Drive for your documents and for your photos, or you use Dropbox for your documents, GitHub, in this case, serves as a platform where you can store your project files. So even if my device gets stolen or it gets crashed or whatever, I have my device stored online and I can always download them when I need them. Also for versioning projects, and this is the soul, this is like the core of the whole idea of Git. It allows you to version your project, and you can easily go to a previous version. You can easily see what version 1 looked like. You can easily see what version 7 looked like. You can easily go through different versions. If maybe you love the previous version more than the current version, you can easily go back to the previous version without having to remember what changes you made in the new version. Also for ease in collaboration on projects. So if I am collaborating with one person or 2 other people, instead of having to always be sharing zip files, like I share zip files to them, they share back to me, I make my change, I share back to them, they share back to me. With Git and GitHub, collaboration is even easier. And a lot of companies use Git. Like for managing their projects, they use Git because it's a very sustainable or a scalable way of making it possible for multiple people to collaborate on a project. And you can easily preview your previous changes, which also has a lot to do with the fact that they are versioned. And sharing project files now is easier. You don't have to share a zip file or hard drive file. You can easily share your Git project. For example, if you want to see the Git project, for example, this is the Git project for my website, dillionmegida.com. If I want to share this file with you, you want to see how I made the header blue, or how I made this, that, or blah, 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 I can easily share this link with you, and you can go on here and you can see the whole files for my project. Let's continue. Now, GitHub, like I said, for storing project files, and you can also store project files for free. I know there is a limit, but I cannot currently remember what the limit is, but I know you can store as many files as you like there. So it's just like Google Drive, but for your project. And you cannot lose your files if your device crashes. If my laptop today crashes, I have most of my project already on GitHub. I can easily get a new device. Well, not like easily, getting a new device is expensive, but once I'm able to afford a new device, I can easily pull my projects back from GitHub. And I remember one time when my laptop crashed, and when it crashed, I lost a lot of my photos, I lost a lot of my documents, I lost a lot of things, but I didn't lose any of my projects because they were all online. Once I got a new device, I pulled them back. And you can also work on your project on different devices. Like currently I have a company laptop and I have a personal laptop. And although I don't use my company laptop for personal stuff, but if I also want to work on my personal projects when I'm in the company, I can easily use my company laptop, log into GitHub, download my project, and I can do the same things. And once I'm done with the changes I want to make, I can push them back to GitHub. I can come back to my home, use my personal laptop, and continue from where I stopped. So I can work on my project on different devices. And when we talk about versioning projects, updates to your project exist as versions. If you add a header to your website, that can be a version. If you add a new image, that can be a version. If you add an about page, that can be a version. If you add authentication, that can be a version. These updates exist as versions. And you can easily go back to a previous version if you don't like the current version. Maybe the current version complicates things, or your application stopped working ever since you added the new version. You can easily go back to the previous version where your application was working as it should work. And you can easily preview previous versions to know when a change was made. So when we talk about versions, what do I mean? Now we have version 1 here. And let's say in version 1, I added style.css, that is a file. And I also added header.js, that is a file. I added footer.js, that is a file. I added home.js, that is a file. And for this version, I gave it the label, just homepage. Now I make some other updates. This is now version 2. In version 2, the label here is add about page. And in version 2, what I did was I updated the style.css. Maybe I added new colors, added new properties, added new whatever. And I also added about.js. This is version 2. Version 2 will contain the changes that version 1 already contains, in addition with the new changes that you introduced in version 2. Version 3, the label here is changed header to blue. In version 3, I updated style.css and I updated header.js. You can see in version 1, there were 4 changes. In version 2, there were 2 changes. In version 3, there were 2 changes. And version 4 has only 1 change. So your versions can include as many changes as you want to include. In version 4, the label here is change footer date. And all I did here is updated the footer.js file. And I can have as many versions as I want to. You'd see, like, if we come back to my Git project here for my website, you can see 646 commits. I will explain what commits means later on in this talk, but this pretty much means 646 versions. Since I created this project, I've been creating multiple versions, and now I have as much as 646 of them. So I can easily go back to version 2 and see what version 2 looked like. I can easily go back to version 7 and see what version 7 looked like. Let's go back. Track changes in each version. Now, if your app is working perfectly fine and you add updates in a new version and things break, you can easily check the new changes in that version instead of checking the whole project for the problem. So going back here, let's say after introducing version 4, the application stops working. Now, instead of having to go through home.js to see what was wrong, go through header.js to see what was wrong, go through style.css to see what was wrong, I can easily check the changes that were introduced in version 4 which are the changes in footer.js, and I can easily focus on that file, and I can try to debug or identify where the problem came in. Moving forward, like I mentioned, Git and GitHub is very useful for collaboration. Different people can work on different parts of a project at the same time. Instead of having to work on my own part, then zip the project and then send it to you, and then you work on your own part, then you send it to me. You can be working on your own parts wherever you are. I can be working on my own parts wherever I am. Git and GitHub helps us to stay synchronized on the same project. Same copy of the project on different devices. So I have the same copy of project A on my device. You also have the same copy of project A on your device. And we can easily synchronize both our copies using GitHub. And if I ever want to see the changes that you have made on your own copy, as long as that change is available online on GitHub, from my own end here, I can easily see what changes you've made. Now, what is Git? We've looked at, like, why we need Git and GitHub. We have looked at like some background story and every other thing. Now let's understand what Git is. When we talk about Git, I want to first clarify that Git is different from GitHub. They work together, but they are different. Git is an open source version control tool for tracking changes in projects. And project here means files. Can be Java files, can be PHP files, can be any kind of file you want. And you see people often use Git for source code management. Like, you won't see people using Git for photos, for pictures, for like Word documents or all those other things. It's mostly for source code management. Now, when we talk about version control, what do we mean? The concept of versioning means that changes you make to your project exist as versions, and we have seen this earlier. And versions hold different states of your project. Version 1 holds a particular state of your project. Version 2 holds an updated state of your project. Version 3 holds a different state of your project. And version control systems like Git enable you to navigate between the different histories of your project, which I've also mentioned earlier. You can easily go to version 1, you can easily go to version 2, wherever. Now, we talked about version 1. Wait, why do I feel like I repeated this slide again? Oh my God. Okay, yeah. I repeated this slide again to explain what version means, but yeah, we've seen this earlier, so I don't need to repeat myself. But this is just the whole concept of versions, where version 1 has a particular state of your project that holds just homepage. Version 2 has a particular state, version 3 has a particular state, and version 4 also has a particular state. Other versions have other states. Now, let's say in version 4, you updated footer.js, and this breaks your application. You can easily revert back to version 3. Version 3 doesn't include the change in footer.js, and that would be working fine. Then you can now work on version 3. So now when you want to add footer.js, you already know, okay, when I did this, there was a problem. Now I should do this. And then that way you are able to create a different version 4. Although in Git, when you revert to a previous version and you make another change, that change will be version 5. Like, you cannot change what version 4 is. Version 4 is version 4. So even if you revert back to version 3, any change you make will now be version 5 that doesn't include version 4 changes. But I mean, that's more into the depth or the technical details of Git. Let's just focus on the fundamentals so we don't get confused. So now we've seen what Git is. We have seen that it's different from GitHub. So what exactly is GitHub then? Now, GitHub is not the same as Git. I already said that. And GitHub is a cloud-based service that works with Git projects. Git can be installed on your device locally. Git exists on its own. GitHub is a tool or a service that is built around Git on the cloud. And this is also often used for source code management. So you would rarely see people using GitHub to manage their Word documents, their Excel sheets, and all those other things. It's usually for project and source code. So what is the difference between Git and GitHub? Git is the version control tool. GitHub is not the version control tool. Git is the version control tool. And Git can live on any machine. It can live on my local device. Git can live on the cloud. Git can live anywhere, anything that serves as a machine, be it a Linux device, a Mac device, a Windows device. Git can live anywhere. While GitHub is the platform built around Git. So what does this mean? This means that Git is also installed on GitHub. Git does not require internet access. If I'm working on Git locally on my device, I can choose to have internet or not be connected to any Wi-Fi, and I will be able to use the features of Git, of Git as much as I want. Git does not require authentication. I don't need to log in. I don't need to enter my email address or password or anything. It can work directly on my device. Once I download Git, I can track different versions of my project locally. And I can use Git without GitHub. But again, GitHub is there for a purpose, as we would soon see. Git operations are done in the terminal. And when I say terminal, this is what I mean. Where is my terminal? Okay, this is the terminal. So when I say terminal, this is what I mean. Let me zoom in. So here in the terminal, I can use Git, and there are different features of Git that I can use here. There is Git branch, there is Git init, there is a lot of them, but we would see that more as we proceed in the talk. Where does GitHub come in? What if my local device crashes? If my local device crashes, even though I have Git and I can easily track different versions of my project and all those other beautiful stuff, I would lose my project. And what if I want someone to collaborate with me on my project? How do I share it? Again, even though I already have Git installed on my device, I'll still have to probably use a local an external hard drive, or zip the file and send to that person before they can collaborate and make their own change. And when you talk about Git, there are a lot of terminal commands involved. For somebody like me, I like commands on the terminal. It makes me feel like a professional developer, even though I'm not a professional developer. But then not everybody likes terminal commands, or some terminal commands are easier than the others. So some other times you need like a tool that provides a better interface for you to execute some of these commands. So now where GitHub comes in, like I said, it's a cloud-based software that allows you to host your Git projects online. It provides a simple UI for navigating files, and you can also view the histories of your project files. And if you remember with Git, Git can be used without GitHub, but GitHub cannot be used without Git. And GitHub offers multiple features for collaborations. So Git on its own has very limited collaboration support because it is on my device locally. But when you bring GitHub into the mix, then I can now easily collaborate with other people. For example, these are my projects on GitHub. I mentioned that GitHub is like a cloud-based storage for different Git projects, and I can show you more of this. So this is my profile here on GitHub, and I have a bunch of files. Some of them are private. So if I come here to repositories, and I'll explain what repositories means soon, but here I have different repositories, like even some of the projects that I never finished, I push them here. So if I ever want to continue them, I don't have to look for them on my device. I can easily go to my GitHub profile. Yeah, I have a bunch of them here. And like I said, some of them are public, so everybody can see it once they come to my profile. Some of them are private, so if you go to my profile, you may not see them. Moving forward, like I said, GitHub is built around Git. So we have Git, and then we have GitHub, which is built around Git. So every feature that you can do in Git, you can do in GitHub. But the beauty of GitHub is that you can also do other things like pull requests. And I think in tomorrow's talk, Anita would share what pull requests are. You can also do things like permissions. What does permissions mean? With the idea of permissions, on GitHub, I can specify that Dillion should be able to make this change, but Anita should not be able to make this change. Now, if I'm just using Git on its own doesn't have all those extra features, permissions, and all those other things. But GitHub that is built around Git provides all those other features. There are also features like issues. There are also features like pipelines. And all of these are technical details. We won't be going so much into this. And there are many more features. So GitHub is built to complement Git. It is different from Git, but it is built to complement Git. It cannot exist without Git. And it also provides support to do the same things you can do in Git. So the same things that I can do on my terminal here, Git, blah, 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 I can also do it on GitHub. And more features for improving collaboration and project efficiency. With Git, collaboration is very limited. With GitHub, collaboration is now more extensive, flexible, and even, should I say, expandable. And yeah, before we look at GitHub alternatives, I also want to just ask, so far, is it clear what Git is, what GitHub is, and how they are different? Or is there any question, anything that confuses you currently? This is open to anyone while I drink water. Okay, I see a few reactions and I see it's clear, it's clear. Okay, great to hear it's clear. Now let's move forward to, oh, I'm a great teacher. Oh, thank you. GitHub alternatives. This was supposed to be animated, but it didn't animate. But before I move into these GitHub alternatives, now because Git is a tool, anybody can build their own tools around Git. For example, if I have a very good knowledge of Git, I can build my own GitHub. People can build different tools around Git. And remember I said Git involves a lot of terminal commands. So people have built different tools that allows you to use a very nice interface to perform Git operations. So you don't have to open your terminal, writing gibberish or writing things you don't understand or copying things from Stack Overflow. You use this interface and it's able to tell you, do this. You click on do this and you see the result of do this. So many people have built tools around Git. And GitHub is also one tool that was built around Git, but it has alternatives. Some people use GitLab, some people use Bitbucket, some people use Gitia, some people use Gitbucket. Sorry, there is Bitbucket and there is Gitbucket. Some people use Git's Kraken. The difference between these alternatives could differ. It could be that GitLab allows you to write your code directly on GitLab without having to download it to your device. It could be that Bitbucket has extra permissions that GitHub doesn't have. You can look at these alternatives as competitors. You know, this one is trying to say, I can do this more than you, I can do this more than you, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, they are all built around Git. Git is the main tool. So now we have seen what Git is, we've seen what GitHub is, we've seen the alternatives, we have seen where GitHub comes in. Now let's move to the fundamental concepts in Git and GitHub. And as we walk through these fundamental concepts, I will be using the simple project example to go through them. Yeah, I think we have some time to actually do that. So there are so many concepts in Git, and 1 hour or even 2 hours is not enough to look at all the concepts. But we'll be looking at a few of them that can hopefully get you started with using Git in your project. We'll look at what a repository is. We'll look at what cloning is. We'll look at what untracked and tracked files are. We'll look at what stage changes are. We'll look at what snapshots and commits are. We'll look at what branches are. We'll look at what checkout is. We'll look at what merging is, linking local and remote, pushing, pulling, and many more. There are many more terms than we can actually look at in this meeting. So let's start from a repository. A repository is a Git project which contains your project files as well as the history information of each file. That is basically what a repository is. You would hear the term used a lot. It is basically a Git project, a Git-based project. Your project can exist on its own, be it your Java project, your whatever project. Once you introduce Git into the mix, it becomes a Git project or a Git repository. So once you initialize Git, which is introducing Git into your project, it becomes a repository. And the command to do this is git init. So this is where we begin to play a little with the terminal, but don't worry, I'm not going to throw in like huge terms. So how do I want to start this? So I'll come to my terminal here, and I'm going to make a project, and I'm just going to call this project Tiwi project. By the way, this is just some terminal stuff for creating a directory, and this is Tiwi project, and let me try to open the project here. Sorry, I'm just currently trying to open the Tiwi project on my editor. So if I come here and I say code, this is not how I want you. Come to the edge here. Great. So I have this project called TW project. In this project, let me just create some files. I'll just call this file1.js and create another file, file2.txt, gibberish. Wait a minute. Where are you? And I'll create a directory. I'll call these demos, and in demos, I'll just create another file, file3.py, which is an extension for Python. I don't know so much of Python, but anyways. And in demos, I'll create another file called file4.java. I also don't know Java a lot. So we have this project. Currently, this project is just TW project. It is not yet a Git project. So you cannot call it a Git repository yet. I want to install recommended. No, I don't want. So how do I introduce Git into the mix? Like I said, the command for this is git init. So currently in my terminal, I am inside TW project, which is the project I just created. And now I can run git init. So you can see here, it says initialize empty Git repository in this place. So now this is a Git project. And what do you see introduced into this directory? We have a .git directory here. This signifies that this is now a Git project. So let's move on. Like I said, when you're using Git, this can exist on your device locally, and it can also exist on GitHub. So by using git init here, creating this directory, I have a repository on my device locally. I can also have a repository on GitHub. Let's say I want to create a new repository. I can come here and click new. And by clicking new, I can specify the repository name TW project. I can give this a description. I can make it public or private. I'm just going to leave all those other things, and I'll just come here to create repository. So I have a repository on my profile, which says TW project, and I have a repository locally, which is TW project. Now let's move on. Locally, I have all the files that makes up that project. This could be Python files, Markdown files, TXT files, HTML, CSS, any file. And then when I initialized Git, you saw that this Git directory was created. I can show you that again. This is the Git directory. And this directory contains the history information about every files that I want to track in my project. So you can see a bunch of things here. If you are very interested, you can go on and learn about the details about this Git directory, but we cannot really go into that. And on GitHub, like we saw, this is the new repository that I just created. And just to show you the repository for my website again, by the way, this is my website, dillionmegida.com. And these are all the files that makes up my website. This is the repository for it. You can see so many files I have made in the last 3 years since I had this website. Okay, so that's it about repository. Now let's move forward to the next term, which is cloning. Cloning is similar to downloading. So with cloning, what you're doing is that you are downloading a project from a cloud-based service. And as we are saying in this talk, the cloud-based service is GitHub. So with cloning, I can download a Git project from GitHub, and downloading that project does not only come with the project files, but it will also come with all the history information around the files in that project. And the command for this is git clone URL. And yeah, let me clone, or let me just go to GitHub and just clone somebody's project. Well, I don't think I can clone somebody's project, can I? I should be able. So this is somebody's project, blah, blah, blah. I don't know whatever that project is. And when I come here, you see I have HTTPS. This is a URL for HTTPS. There's also a URL for SSH. There's a difference between SSH and HTTPS, but I cannot explain that in this talk. But right here, I can copy this URL. So I copy it here, and then I can go to my terminal here. I'll go back to the previous directory, and I can say git clone. As you can see here, we have git clone, then the URL. So I have git clone, and then I can paste the URL that I just copied. Cloning into Repanda, Git does its stuff, compressing, whatever. I don't know what that means. Great. Now I can go into Redpanda, and I can open this on my editor. And yeah, this is Redpanda. So you can see by cloning this, I have been able to download this project. So this is the project on GitHub. You can see we have this directory, buildkite.github.vim, cmake. I don't know whatever this project does, but here I've downloaded it locally. So now I have the same thing, buildkite.git, vim, conf, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all this stuff. As you can see, again, we have this .git directory because it is a Git project. It is a Git repository. But I don't have any business with this person's project, so I'm going to close it. Oh, that was not closing. Yeah, that is closing. All right, I will go back to CW project because that is the project I'm interested in. By the way, if you want to run your Git command, you have to make sure that you're in the right project. If I go, let's say I go to the previous project, and I try to run a Git command. Let's say I try to run git status. We'll look at what status means later. You can see it says not a Git repository. That's because my GitHub directory is not a Git repository. But if I go to the right directory, which is TW project, and I run git status, you can see now things work. So if you want to execute Git commands, you have to make sure you're doing it in the right directory. Now there is a question, somebody says, what's the difference between cloning and forking? So forking is, let's go back to this person's project. So what forking does is, you can see this red panda is currently on this person. This person is, the person's username is redpanda/data. This is where this project lives. Now, when I clone it, all I do is I copy this information from GitHub to my local device. But if I'm going to fork this, what fork would mean is that it's going to copy this repository to my profile, which is github.com/Dillion. And I can quickly test that. So if I click on fork, you see it's now going to fork it to my own profile. So if I click create fork, you can now see I have github.com Dillion/redpanda. So it's now like this is my project, but this is not my project. This is actually from Redpanda. And you can see what GitHub does. GitHub tells you that this was forked from this person's profile. So I have a copy of their project on my own GitHub account. So that is what forking does. Forking would make that copy to my own GitHub account, but cloning would download a copy to my local device. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, we can look at it again at the end of the talk. You can see we're running out of time. So I've looked at cloning, and I hope that is clear. The next term we're going to look at is untracked and tracked files. Oh, it's very clear. Thank you. I feel so glad. Untracked and tracked files. What does this mean? Now, when you initialize Git in an existing project, even though that project is now a Git project, you have not told Git what files in that project to track. So if I come to this project here, let's say I make a change. I'm going to close this. Let's say I make a change to file.js and I just declare a variable equals like. Git doesn't know that file1.js has been updated. It has no idea because I haven't told Git to track this file. Git knows that I live in this Git project. This is a Git repository, but I don't know what files to track. And this is when you initialize Git in an existing project, you have that whole problem, not a problem, but you have that situation of untracked files. Another case where you have untracked files is when you add a new file in your project. So even if you have already told Git to track file 1, file 2, file 3, file 4, if I come here and I add a new file called file 5 dot, let me see, what other language do I know? SH is for bash script. Because I've added a new file, Git doesn't automatically know that I should track this file. And all these labels here is, so I'm currently using VS Code, and then I have some Git extensions. And what those Git extensions allows me to do is, it helps to inform me that, for example, this U means this is an untracked file. So Git doesn't know anything about file 5.sh. Even if Git is in the same directory as this file, I haven't yet told Git, I want you to track this file. So if you make changes to an untracked file, Git would have no idea. And now this is where we use Git status. Let's say I want to view the state of my Git project. You use Git status. So I'll come back to the terminal. This should not be here. I'm going to move you to the edge. Good. So if I come back to the terminal and I run Git status, what do you see? It says untracked files. All of these files, I haven't started tracking them yet. So Git doesn't know if any changes are made. So then how do we track files? To inform Git to track the history of a file, you can add the file to the staging area, and then you take a snapshot of the staging area. With that, Git will add it to his list of tracked files, and then when you make changes to that tracked file, Git will be informed. Now, I'm going to show you how to track a file, but then we need to understand what stage changes are. Stage changes are changes in files, new files or existing files that you want to record as a version. Now, just to show you something, let's go back to file1.js. It's not like if I type A, this is going to be version 1. If I type B, this is going to be version 2. If I type C, this is going to be version 3. Like every tiny edit I make is going to be version. No, that is not how versioning works. The concept of versioning means you make changes to a couple of files. You make changes to a couple of files, and then you tell Git that these changes I've made to this file, I want to record it as a version. And that is where stage changes comes in. So with stage changes, you are able to prepare the files that you want to add to a new version. And the command for stage changes is git add, and then the file that you want to add to your stage change. So if I come here and I say git add file1.js, I've added file1.js to my staged area, or you can call it a staging area, which means I want file1 to be part of the next version that I want to create on my project. If I run git status, you can see changes to be committed. File1 is there. And then all these other ones are still untracked. I can also add file2 dot, what is the extension for file2? txt. You can add file2 dot txt. I come here and I run git status. You can see these are the 2 changes that I've added to the staging area. Now, if I want to add every change I have made, I can simply do, I think the shortcut is git add and a period. So if I do git add and period, it's going to add every change I have made. But the only time you should do this is if you want every change to be in your next version. If you only want 2 changes to be in your next version, then you shouldn't use git add and a period. So now I'm not going to execute this, but just note that if I execute this, it's going to add all of these changes I have made to the staging area. So I'm not going to execute this. So currently I only have 2 files in the staging area. And then after doing this, you can view the staging area with git status, which we have done. But now that you have the stage changes, you haven't yet recorded this as a version. This is just, you have prepared it, like, I want this to be part of my next version, but you haven't recorded that version yet. And this is where you take a snapshot. A snapshot, where is the CH coming from? And the idea of a snapshot is that you have your state changes ready to be recorded as a new update in your history, and then a snapshot records those changes. So it's like a stamp, like all of these changes I've made, I'm going to stamp it as a new version. And you can also call a snapshot a commit. In fact, more people call it commit, but I thought to also introduce the term snapshot so that you are not surprised if you hear it anywhere. And the command for taking a snapshot is git commit, and then you have the -m, which is like your message. So it's like, we are taking a snapshot, you want to leave a label so that you can easily identify that snapshot later. So you have -m, and then you can enter your message here. So I'm going to come here and I can say git commit -m, and the message I want to type here is random stuff. Now I have taken a snapshot. I've taken a snapshot of these changes that were in the staged area. You should also know that because I didn't track these files, because I didn't add these files to the staging area, they are not going to be part of this snapshot that I just made. Only the changes in the staging area. And so this is what happens. This is Git here, and this is the staging area. And whatever you have in your staging area, Git takes a snapshot of it. Chakam, or whatever snapshot sound effect sounds like to you. And after taking a snapshot, the staging area is cleared. So if I go back here, since I've taken a snapshot, if I go back here and I run git status, you can see I don't have anything in the staging area anymore. The previous files or the previous changes I had in that staging area has been added to the previous snapshot. BB, are you there? There's someone whose mic has been let loose. Or whoever that is, can you mute your mic? Okay, great. So after taking snapshots, you can also view a list of your snapshots. So let me take another snapshot first. So let's say I want to add demos file3.py to my snapshot. Let me just say some Py stuff. That's not valid. Let me write valid Python code. Import OS. Yeah, I think that's valid in Python. Great. I can come here and I can say git add. The file path to file3.py is demos/file3.py. So I can say demos/file3.py. If I come here and I run git status, you can see this is now in the staging area. And then I can take a snapshot using git commit -m, and I can say added Python stuff. Now, what do you see here? I have 2 versions. I have taken 2 snapshots. The first snapshot included 2 files. This second snapshot included 1 file. So if I want to view all the snapshots I have in my project, I use git log. So if I come here and I say git log, you see this is the first snapshot I took. random stuff. This was the message. This was the date the snapshot was taken. This is the author. This is the commit ID. So every snapshot, also called a commit, has an ID. This is the ID. And this is the second snapshot here. This is the message, added Python stuff. This is the commit ID. This is the date. And you can even get more information on your snapshot. This is just a summarized version. Going forward, if I want to view the changes that was made in a snapshot, I can do git show commit ID. So if I go back here and I say git log, and I copy the ID of this first commit, I run git commit, git show, and then I pass this ID, you can see these were the changes that I made. The changes I made was that I added a new file, which was this file, constant variable is equals to Dillion. And then I also added this file, which is file2.txt. And in this file, I wrote gibberish. So with git show, you can see the changes that you made in a particular commit. I'll try to be faster now. I think I'm running out of time. Branches. Now let's look at branches. By default, a repository contains one branch. And what is a branch? A branch is like a working area of your project. And with branches, you can have different areas, different working areas of your project. So you have the main working area. You can have another area, which is a copy of the main area. You can make your changes on that area. You can have as many working areas as you want. And this allows you to simultaneously work on different parts of your project and record your changes. So instead of, let's say I want to work on this project, you want to work on this project, instead of both of us working on the main branch, the main working area, I can go to a different working area. You can go to a different working area. I make my change in my own working area. You make your change in your own working area. And then when we are done, I can bring my working area to the main area. I can kind of combine it, consolidate it. You can also consolidate yours. So let's look at an example. Let's say we have the main branch. This is the main branch. This is where maybe this is the branch your users get to see, the customers get to see, or your portfolio, the one that goes live. And then I want to work on the feature. You also want to work on another feature. And what I do is I branch out. I branch out to this, I branch out, or I create this branch where I want to add an about page. Now, one thing you should note is if you can see the arrow here, I think if I slide this, this will be big. Good. So this point here where I branch out means that I would only have the changes from this beginning point, the big. It's not getting big. Anyways, you get the point. From this point up until this point, those are the only changes I will have when I branch out. So these other changes here would not be included on this branch. And let's say you also want to work on your own feature. You have your own branch. You branch out from this point. That means you would only have the change from this beginning point here up until this point where you branch out. You will not have the changes on the about page because you branched out from the main branch. And when I'm done with my about page feature, I've done, make the changes I want to make to whatever CSS file, to whatever JavaScript file, I can merge it. And we'll look at what merging is later on. But merging simply means all the changes I have from the about page, I'm now going to combine it back to the main branch. And then when you're also done with your own team feature, you can also bring your changes to the main branch. And then the main branch will now contain the changes from my branch, from your branch, from Blessing's branch, from which person's name can I see here? Neka's branch, from Kamal's branch, from Oluwadamilola's branch, from everybody's branches. If you don't merge them, they would never contain those information, only until you merge them. So branches, you create different branches for different features. Now, this is a good development practice. And yeah, it's good to do things like this because if we are all working on the same main branch, if I make changes to style.css and you make changes to style.css, my change may overwrite yours or your change may overwrite mine. So it's good for us to branch out I can make changes on style.css in my branch. You can make changes on style.css in your branch, but when we are merging it, we can be able to see, okay, should my own style.css overwrite this person's own, or should this person's own overwrite my own? You can be able to make all of those decisions, but it's easier to have that separation of concerns. And the command for creating a branch is git branch and then branch name. So let's go back here, and then I have git branch, and I'm going to create a branch where I call this branch add I don't know so many programming languages. I'm just going to add a JavaScript file. Let's say I want to add footer.js. This is my branch name. Also create as many branches as I want. So after adding a branch, the new branch will contain all the information from the current branch up until the point where the new branch was created. So what does that mean? It means that if I go back to git log, these are the two snapshots I've taken: random stuff, added Python stuff. Those are the two snapshots that would be recorded in the add footer.js branch, because that was the point at which I branched off. Let's say I create a new snapshot on the main branch. By the way, you can see this is main, which means main branch. So let's say I add demos / what is the second file? File 4.java. File 4.java, and I take a snapshot of this add Java file. This change would not be included in this branch because I already created this branch before I made this change, and we'll confirm that soon. But if you want to view all the branches you have on your device, you use git branch. So if I do git branch, you can see I have two branches. I have add footer.js and I have main. Trying to hurry up. By the way, like I said, because GitHub is built around Git, I can choose to create a new branch on my local device. I can also choose to create the branch on GitHub. And just to quickly show you, on this repo here, this is the place that says branch. So I can come here. When I click on this, I can type new branch. When I click on this, this would create the branch, new branch. So that's why I said GitHub is built around Git. Internally, GitHub is doing git branch and the name that I entered. That's why I said GitHub cannot exist without Git. Now let's look at checkout. Checkout allows you to navigate between branches, and it will update the files to match the state of the branch. So currently, I've created a branch called add footer.js, but I am still on the main branch, as you can see here on my terminal. So how do I go into this branch and make the changes that I want to make into that branch? That is where I use checkout. I'm not sure I included the command for that. I didn't include the command for that. I will update the slide to include the command. But if I want to check out into that branch, I have git checkout and then the branch that I want to check out into. Does that sound correct? But then I would have add footer.js. And as you can see here, it says switched to branch add footer.js. Now let me show you something. If I press git log, you see git log only has these two snapshots. But if I go back to main, let's say git checkout main, and I do git log, you see it has 3 snapshots. What does this mean? The point at which I branched out for add footer.js, I had not yet recorded the 3rd snapshot. And that's why the diagram I showed you earlier, I specified that when you're branching out, it will branch out from the current state of the branch that you're branching out from. I don't know if that sentence makes sense. But yeah, let's go back to add footer.js. By the way, if you want to know what branch you are currently on, you can run git branch. And when you run git branch, it will show you the list of branches. And then the one with star is the one that you are currently on. So every change you make will be on that active branch. If I make any change, let's say I add a snapshot in add footer.js. So I'll come back to my code here and then I add footer.js. And here I'm just going to say const footer stuff. Now I'm going to add this to the staging area, git add footer.js, and then I'm going to take a snapshot, add footer.js. If I press git log, you see this branch now has 3 snapshots. It has 2 snapshots that are coming from the main branch where it's branched out from, and then it has this new change. Again, if I go back to main and I press git log, you see that the footer.js snapshot is not here. That's because I took that snapshot on a different branch, and the main branch is not aware of that snapshot. Anyways, let's hurry up. So we've looked at checkout. Now git merge. And what is the purpose of git merge? Git merge allows you to combine the changes in one branch to another branch. And you have to be careful when you use git merge, because conflicts may arise if changes were made to the same file in each branch. Let's say in one branch I make changes to style.css, in another branch I make style to CSS. I try to merge those two. You begin to get conflict of like, okay, both of you touch this file. Git will be like, which one should I use? Should I use this person's changes or should I use your own changes? That is where you make decisions, but we're not going to look at that in this talk. Now, the command to merge is git merge and then the branch that you want to merge. So let's go back here. We're currently in main. If I do git branch, you can see the asterisk is on main, so I know I'm currently in main. Now I want to merge, add footer.js branch. I click on merge. And yeah, it brings this editor where I have to specify the message, because another thing too is merging that branch is a snapshot. So you're not just going to merge that branch and its existing snapshots. Merging that branch is also taking a snapshot of, this is the state of that branch, and now I want to bring that state to the main branch. So after recording whatever message or label I want to use for that snapshot, I can close it, and you see I have made that merge. Now on the main branch, if I do git log, you see we have random stuff, our first snapshot, second snapshot, third snapshot. Now this is the 4th snapshot that came from the add footer.js branch. And like I told you, merging is also a snapshot. So as you can see here, I also have another snapshot with the message merge branch add footer.js. Let's hurry up and keep going. Now, all these things that we have done are locally, and we just use Git. And that is why I said Git can exist without GitHub. So far, I haven't used GitHub. Everything I've done is on Git. If not for this meeting, I could even do all of these things without internet connection. So now we need to introduce GitHub. And the reason why we need to introduce GitHub is because if my laptop crashes, I would lose all my project. So now I want to push all of these things to GitHub so I can host them on GitHub. Before I can do that, I have to be able to link the local repository that I have. This is the local repository I have on my editor. I have to be able to link it with the GitHub version, which is this one, TW project. Now, if I cloned a repository, by default, the project will be linked. Like when I cloned that person's project, automatically it's already linked. I don't have to link it myself. But since I didn't clone TW project and I created it manually on my device, then I have to manually link it myself. And here it says you need to link your local project with the GitHub project. The GitHub project is called remote project. The reason why it's called remote is because it's living like on the cloud. It's living somewhere else remotely. The project I have on my device is called local project. The one on GitHub or any cloud-based service, be it GitLab, Bitbucket, Gitbucket, and the rest I showed you earlier, that is a remote project. And the reason why I need to upload the reason why I need to sync this is so that I can be able to upload and download changes. And the way I can create that linking is using git remote add origin, then the URL. For the URL, I can copy it from here. This is the URL here. I'm going to copy it, and then I can go here and I can say git remote add origin, and I paste the URL. Now I have linked my local repository with the remote repository. Now let's talk about pushing and pulling. Pushing and pulling is important to keep your local and remote copies of a project in synchronization, because as you can see right now, I have made so many changes to my TW project locally, but if I come here and I refresh on GitHub, GitHub doesn't have any idea of those changes I've made locally. So this is where pushing and pulling comes, so that I can keep the remote version and the local version in sync. And pushing means uploading the changes to your Git project. Pulling means pulling the changes in the remote repository to your local repository. So let's say somebody else has made their own change, they have pushed it to GitHub. I will not know until I pull. Then when I pull, I can now see the changes that person made. And pushing would only upload the new commits you have since you last pulled. Typo error again, I'm sorry. But how do you push? Git push origin main. And what this does is that origin comes from the reference for the remote URL. If you remember here, this was the reference we created. We said origin, and this references this URL. So that is what this origin means here. And then what does main mean here? It means I'm pushing to the main branch on GitHub. So I'm just going to run that, git push origin main. Now, when I run this command, this would only push the snapshots that I've taken. Before I run this command, let's run git status. You see that this file is still on track. So GitHub knows nothing about this file. It knows no changes about this file. So if I run git push origin main, it will only push the snapshots that I have. Works. So this has pushed to the remote branch. If I come here now and I refresh, these are the changes I have. This is footer.js, file2.txt, file1.js, demos, and GitHub also allows you to navigate between files. So if I open demos, you can see the files inside of demos. Let's proceed. Okay, we've actually reached the end. Well, great. So yeah, this is the whole idea of pushing. And let's say I make a change. I'm going to make a change directly. So let's say here on GitHub, I add a file. Sorry, I call this new file.js, and I just say constant new file is equals to new stuff. When I add a file, I can take a snapshot of that file. So here I can say added new file, and I commit new file, which is taking a snapshot. Now I have new file.js. But if I go back here to the code, you see that I don't, let me close this. You see that I don't have new file.js here. So this is where I pull. This way I'm able to pull the changes that are on the remote repository that I do not have. So if I come here and I say git pull origin main, and it's going to pull from this reference, and it's going to pull from the main branch. So I'm going to run this. And it works. And if I come back here, you see I now have new file.js. So this is where pulling and pushing comes in. With pushing, I push the new snapshots I have to GitHub. With pulling, I pull the snapshots that I don't already have, but GitHub has. If I come here now and I run git pull again, because I already have all the snapshots that GitHub has, you see here it says already up to date. And there is more to Git and GitHub than what we have seen today, but these are the fundamental concepts to get you started. Like I mentioned, every project I pick up, I use Git and I use GitHub. Like recently, I was on my website, I made this change, and my website stopped working. Like I couldn't push new changes. I haven't been able to work on my website for like 2 weeks now. I was just able to resolve that change today. If not for Git, debugging, finding the problem, knowing exactly where that problem came from would have been difficult. But because all of these things were versioned, I could easily clear off the previous version and make the solutions and improvement. So this is also an encouragement that you should start using Git, get familiar with the tool. Of course, it's also a skill. So you get familiar with it, you know how to navigate your way around it, you know how to solve errors. And trust me, In so many companies you find today, they are using Git and GitHub. So even if you may be a good front-end developer, a good back-end developer, a good designer, well, in some cases, designer may play, I don't know anyways. But if you're playing with like code files a lot, even if you have all of these experiences, if you don't have Git or GitHub experience, it could also affect how much opportunities you have. And we've seen most of the theories today. Tomorrow, Anita, I believe she has, or she's currently preparing a slide, or she's done already. She would go through the practical aspect, and you can see more practical ways of using Git. Once again, I am Dillion Megida, and these are my social media platforms, even down to TikTok. And I have a Calendly link if you want to book a meeting with me to talk about software development, developer advocacy, content creation, whatever it is. You can click that link and you'll be able to get a slot for my next available time. I've talked a lot. I need to drink water. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much, Dillion. Thank you so much for your time. I think I should see more reactions than we are seeing now. Thank you really, really well for digesting and sharing everything about Git and GitHub to the community. I'm certain a lot of people or some people will have questions, but so we could take like one or two, and then we could call tonight's meeting to a close. Marvin, I think you have a question, so please. Okay, he has left the call. So, do we have any questions for Dillion? One or two people, and then we could all go to bed for tonight. Anyone with a question, just raise your hands. Uh, okay, so I'm guessing we all understood the question. Okay, there's one person. Hi, developer, you can ask your question, please.
Good evening, everyone.
Yep.
Okay, you like I did not join the Zoom call. I did call earlier, so like you were saying something about Git, and I've learned some things from what you have said so far. So, if you want to install Git to your system, like what are the procedure?
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. That was the first thing I was supposed to talk about. Installing Git to your system is, I think I'm just going to share the website for installing Git because it's pretty simple. Like if you're using a Windows device, if you're using a Linux device, if you're using a Mac device, there is a simple way to install Git. And yeah, I'm just going to share a link in the channel or in the chat, not channel. I'm going to share a link in the chat. I think it shows how to install on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Yeah, I've sent it. So whatever device you're on, you can simply download Git. And once you download Git, you can head to your terminal and then you can do the different things that I have done so far in the talk. Again, I'm sorry I didn't include this earlier.
Okay,
Okay.
like is it like a software like exe file? Like because I'm using Windows 10, my Windows 10 does not have terminal.
No, it has a terminal. It has a PowerShell.
Okay,
You can search, I think it's
I,
PowerShell in Windows. Yeah, if you search for PowerShell, you would see a terminal interface and then you can write any Git commands you want. I mean, and one thing I was also like, when I was discussing this with Blessing, I was like, this is a session where I get to touch the terminal. And that's why I tried not to touch the terminal a lot because, yeah, without prior terminal knowledge, it may be a little difficult to grasp how to use Git. But I would say probably just spend little time learning about terminal, how to use it for your device. And then all of the things we have applied so far in this talk, you can apply it.
Okay.
okay. Lastly, someone was saying that is it possible to use the terminal in your phone, like because most of the times we use our phone to like view project.
Yeah,
Like for me, I use my phone to view some project.
yeah,
Yeah, more than my system because of battery and light.
yeah. Honestly, I think by default, I don't think phones have that support. At least I don't know about iPhones, maybe Android phones or some other forms of phones. But I know there are some applications you can download on your phone that would allow you to use your phone. So if you're able to download such applications and they give you that support, then yes, you can run the same things that we have run on your terminal. But I would also recommend that most of these things are applied on your laptops. That's the most effective way to actually see them being used.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I also see people asking about the link. So for the talk, so I'm going to share a link with you right now, but you would not see the link. You will not see the page currently. But give it like 30 minutes. I'm going to upload it, and then you can see it.
Okay, so there are two questions on YouTube. I don't know if the first person is really asking the question though. He says how to solve nothing to commit. The working tree is clean. And the other person is asking how to configure the color terminal that is showing the branch main that you are on.
Okay, so for that, I would recommend, for the second question, I would recommend going to my YouTube channel, and yeah, I can make out time tomorrow to make a video on that, because it's not like you just click a button and that works. So my YouTube channel is youtube.com/, I'm sharing it in the Google Meet now. Sorry, I should make that a link. So hopefully by tomorrow, no promises, but hopefully by tomorrow I'll make a video on that. youtube.com/@decode. Now for the first question of no commit or empty working tree, the way I answer that may not be the best right now because we have run out of time. But what I can think of right now is check your staged changes. There's probably nothing in your stage changes. You have probably not recorded any change. You have probably not added any changes to the staging area that you want to take a snapshot of. So when you try to take a snapshot of nothing, then it tells you there is nothing to take a snapshot of. So make sure that you have already used git add to add the files that you want to take a snapshot of, and then hopefully that works. I don't know if just saying it like this helps, or I don't know, Blessing, can I quickly share my screen?
We're really fast spent, so maybe this is something we would answer in-house. So we're
Or
really
maybe
fast.
even tomorrow. If Anita is here, she will take note of that.
That
You
is
can sort
also
it out tomorrow.
a fix.
So like
Okay, so
I just shared the link to the talk on the chat. I'm sharing it again. And maybe BB you can share for those in YouTube. I don't know if this goes to YouTube, but in the next 30 minutes, it would be live.
okay, thank you. There's a last question here I think you should take. Someone is asking, do we take a snap? Do you take, is it advisable to always commit, that is, take a snapshot every time you make a change to your file?
So it depends. If you make, let's say I want to work on, let's say I want to work on an about, sorry. Let's say I want to work on a header page. Now, in a header page, I may make changes to style.css to change the color. I may make changes to link.css where I change the color of the links. One thing with commit is try to group them as much as you can. So if you're going to update the header, then that could maybe group 3 files together, and then you take a snapshot of those 3 files. But if you want to update the header, and then the only file that you get to change is header.js, then instead of like adding other unrelated changes, you can just take a snapshot of only header.js with a commit label like updated header. So one thing with commit or one thing with snapshot is try to group related changes together before taking snapshots. Again, it should not be big. Don't group like 30 files together because that would make it hard for you to really preview the changes. So maybe like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, there is no hard figure on it, but yeah, make sure it's just related and then take snapshots. And of course, take snapshots as often as possible so that it's easier for you to go back instead of changing all the 10 files that you have worked on in the last 2 days at once. So I think this is where we come to an end.
Yes, so this is where we come to an end. Thank you all for joining today's meeting. Thank you seriously, Dillion, for taking our time to teach and answer our questions. Please, you can follow Dillion on Twitter and check out his website. If you have more questions and you'd like to reach out to him, you can use his Calendly also that he shared, and then you can book a meeting with him and have a talk with him. So thank you again, Dillion, for coming to today's section. We really, really, really learned a lot from today, and I'm sure all of us, everyone here, is grateful. So thank you for taking our time to do this with the community. We are grateful. So good night, everyone. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hi, Wisdom. Are you still here? Would you like to say anything or?
Nothing much. I would probably just say thank you, Dillion, for your time. And everybody's calling you a great teacher. So myself, I also do that. So you did a great job. Thank you so much for, I would say, installing the Git and GitHub knowledge, because we have so many beginners, and I'm so much happy that they appreciated your time. And most are technical writers, new, some are developers that want to dive and change career. So this is the topic that will help them grow, and you have contributed to that journey. So I would say, as a Christian, I would say God bless you.
Amen.
Thank you.
As a Christian, I'll say amen. Well, thanks for inviting me. Also, this was really great. Also learning about this. So yeah, thanks to everybody that organized this and for inviting me.
All right, then. Good night, everyone. Have an amazing night rest. And good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever you are. Have a good day, guys. Good night, everyone. Thank you.